Today, we delve into the critical moments of the Korean War, exploring its origins, significant events, and lasting impact. We'll unravel the pivotal events that shaped this intense conflict and its profound consequences on the Korean Peninsula and global politics. Let's embark on a journey through history, beginning with the division of Korea, a crucial event that set the stage for the Korean War. Division of Korea, 1945. In August 1945, the conclusion of World War II marked a significant turning point for Korea. After 35 years of Japanese colonial rule, Korea was liberated, but the end of Japanese control left the peninsula in a state of uncertainty. The question of how to manage Korea's transition from colonial rule to independence was quickly overshadowed by the broader geopolitical tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. As the Allied powers sought to orchestrate the surrender of Japanese forces in Korea, they faced the challenge of determining how to divide the administration of the peninsula. The decision was made at a time when the geopolitical landscape was shifting and the emerging Cold War rivalry between the superpowers was becoming apparent. In August 1945, an agreement was reached between the Soviet Union and the United States to divide Korea along the 38th parallel. This line, drawn roughly in the middle of the peninsula, was intended to facilitate the surrender of Japanese troops and establish temporary administrative zones. The Soviet Union occupied the northern part of Korea, while the United States took control of the southern portion. This division was not based on ethnic or cultural considerations, but was a strategic measure to manage the immediate post-war situation. The Soviets and Americans agreed that this division would be temporary, with the goal of eventually establishing a unified and independent Korea. However, the ideological and geopolitical tensions between the superpowers soon turned this temporary arrangement into a more permanent division. The Cold War rivalry influenced the development of distinct political and economic systems in the North and South. The Soviet Union supported the establishment of a communist government in the North, while the United States backed the creation of a democratic government in the South. In the North, the Soviet Union's support played a crucial role in the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in 1948, led by Kim Il-sung. The Soviets provided political and military support to consolidate the communist regime, shaping North Korea's political and economic structure along socialist lines. In the South, the United States supported the creation of the Republic of Korea in 1948 under the leadership of Syngman Rhee. This government was founded on democratic principles and capitalist economics, in stark contrast to the communist North. The United States' influence in the South helped shape its political and economic systems, setting the stage for the ideological and political conflict that would follow. The division of Korea was more than a mere geographic separation. It represented a profound ideological and political divide. The North and South Koreas developed along divergent paths, reflecting the broader Cold War struggle between communism and capitalism. This division was marked by increasing tensions and hostilities, as both governments claimed legitimacy over the entire Korean peninsula. As the Cold War intensified, the division became increasingly entrenched. The ideological chasm between the North and South was reflected in their respective policies and governance structures. North Korea's government prioritized centralized control, state ownership of resources, and adherence to socialist principles, while South Korea embraced democratic governance, market-oriented policies, and alignment with Western powers. The division of Korea set the stage for the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. The conflict began with North Korea's invasion of South Korea, a move driven by the desire to reunify the peninsula under communist rule. The Korean War was a direct consequence of the division and would further solidify the separation between the two Koreas. In summary, the division of Korea in 1945 was a pivotal event that laid the groundwork for the Korean War and shaped the geopolitical landscape of the Cold War era. It marked the beginning of a deep-seated separation between North and South Korea, defining the trajectory of the peninsula's history and influencing global politics. Establishment of separate governments, 1948. The year 1948 was a defining moment in the history of Korea, as it marked the formal establishment of two separate governments on the peninsula. This division was not merely a geographical separation, but a profound ideological and political split that would shape the future of Korea and have lasting implications for international relations. As the Cold War rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States intensified, the temporary administrative arrangement established in 1945 was solidified into a more permanent division. In the north, the Soviet Union supported the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. Kim Il-sung, a prominent communist leader with Soviet backing, emerged as the head of this new government. The establishment of North Korea was marked by the consolidation of communist control, with the Soviet Union providing political and military support to ensure the success of Kim Il-sung's regime. In the South, the United States played a pivotal role in the formation of the Republic of Korea, South Korea. Syngman Rhee, an anti-communist and pro-Western figure, became the leader of this new government. The Republic of Korea was founded on democratic principles and capitalist economics, in stark contrast to the socialist North. The United States' influence in the South shaped its political and economic systems, leading to the development of a democratic government and a market-oriented economy. The establishment of these separate governments was a direct result of the ideological and political competition between the superpowers. The North and South Koreas developed along distinct paths, reflecting the broader Cold War struggle between communism and capitalism. The division was not just a matter of political administration, but a profound separation of ideologies, governance structures, and economic systems. The newly established governments each claimed legitimacy over the entire Korean peninsula, further fueling tensions between the North and South. The ideological divide was evident in the policies and governance structures of both Koreas. In the North, the government emphasized state control, collective agriculture, and heavy industry, while in the South, the focus was on democratic governance, individual freedoms, and economic development through industrialization and export-oriented strategies. The division and the establishment of separate governments set the stage for increasing hostilities and tensions between the two Koreas. Both governments viewed the division as a temporary and unacceptable condition, leading to frequent border skirmishes and raids. The political and ideological rivalry between the North and South would eventually culminate in the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. In summary, the establishment of separate governments in 1948 was a pivotal moment in the history of Korea. It solidified the division of the peninsula, set the stage for the ideological and political conflict that would define the Korean War and shape the future of the region. The separation of Korea into two distinct states was a direct result of Cold War dynamics and had profound implications for the peninsula and the broader international community. Invasion of South Korea, 1950. On June 25, 1950, the Korean peninsula was plunged into conflict as North Korean troops, under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, launched a full-scale invasion of South Korea. This dramatic and decisive action marked the beginning of the Korean War, a conflict that would have far-reaching consequences for the Korean peninsula and global politics. The invasion was the culmination of escalating tensions between the North and South, rooted in the ideological and political divide established following World War II. North Korea, driven by the desire to reunify the peninsula under communist rule, saw the invasion as a means to achieve this goal. The North Korean government believed that a swift and decisive military action could topple the South Korean government and reunify Korea under its control. The initial stages of the invasion were marked by rapid and aggressive advances by North Korean forces. Equipped with Soviet weaponry and well-trained troops, the North Korean military quickly overwhelmed the South Korean defenses. The North Korean army crossed the 38th parallel, the boundary established at the end of World War II, and pushed deep into South Korean territory. The South Korean forces, caught off guard and initially unprepared for the scale of the invasion, struggled to mount an effective defense. The swift and overwhelming advance of the North Korean troops led to the fall of the South Korean capital, Seoul, within a matter of days. The capture of Seoul was a significant blow to the South and demonstrated the effectiveness of the North Korean military campaign. The invasion prompted an immediate international response. The United Nations, led by the United States, quickly condemned the North Korean aggression and sought to provide assistance to South Korea. The UN Security Council, influenced by the geopolitical dynamics of the Cold War, passed a resolution calling for military intervention to aid South Korea and restore peace on the peninsula. The United Nations intervention marked a significant turning point in the conflict. The United States, under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, took a leading role in the UN effort to push back the North Korean invasion. The intervention included a combination of military support, strategic planning, and diplomatic efforts to build a coalition of nations committed to defending South Korea. The first major counteroffensive came with the successful Incheon landing operation in September 1950. General MacArthur's daring amphibious assault at Incheon behind enemy lines proved to be a decisive move. The operation cut off North Korean supply lines and allowed UN forces to recapture Seoul and turn the tide of the war. The successful counteroffensive led to the retreat of North Korean forces and a shift in the momentum of the conflict. However, the intervention by UN forces and the subsequent counteroffensive did not end the conflict. The entry of Chinese forces into the war in late 1950 further escalated the conflict and transformed it into a broader international struggle. The Korean War became a protracted and brutal conflict characterized by shifting front lines, high casualties, and intense combat. In summary, the invasion of South Korea in 1950 was a pivotal event that marked the beginning of the Korean War. The aggressive action by North Korean forces set in motion a conflict that would involve international intervention, shifting alliances, and a prolonged struggle for control of the Korean peninsula. The invasion highlighted the deep-seated ideological and political divisions between the North and South and set the stage for a conflict that would have enduring consequences for the region and the world. UN intervention, 1950. The Korean War took a critical turn with the intervention of the United Nations, a response driven by the need to address North Korea's aggressive invasion of South Korea. The UN's involvement was a landmark moment, reflecting the organization's commitment to maintaining international peace and security amid the Cold War's rising tensions. When North Korean troops launched their invasion of South Korea in June 1950, the international community was quick to react. The invasion was met with widespread condemnation, and the United Nations, under the leadership of Secretary General Treve Lai, took decisive action. The UN Security Council, influenced by the geopolitical context of the Cold War and the absence of the Soviet Union, which was boycotting the Council's proceedings over the issue of China's representation, passed a resolution calling for military assistance to South Korea. The resolution, adopted on June 27, 1950, was a significant moment in UN history. It marked one of the first instances where the UN authorized collective military action to address aggression. The resolution called for member states to provide support to South Korea and restore international peace and security. His collective response was pivotal in shaping the course of the Korean War and underscored the UN's role in addressing global conflicts. The United States, as a key member of the UN and a prominent Cold War power, played a leading role in the intervention. President Harry S. Truman and General Douglas MacArthur, who was appointed as the commander of UN forces, spearheaded the international response. The United States committed substantial military resources and personnel to the UN effort, reflecting its strategic interests in the region and its commitment to containing communism. The UN intervention involved a coalition of nations, including troops from several member states, such as the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Turkey, and others. This multinational force was tasked with supporting South Korean forces, repelling the North Korean invasion, and restoring stability to the peninsula. The UN's involvement was not limited to military action. It also included humanitarian assistance and efforts to rebuild war-torn areas. One of the most notable military actions during the UN intervention was the Incheon landing, a daring amphibious operation led by General MacArthur in September 1950. The landing at Incheon, behind enemy lines, was a strategic masterstroke that turned the tide of the war. The successful operation allowed UN forces to recapture Seoul and drive North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel. The Incheon landing was a pivotal moment that demonstrated the effectiveness of the UN's collective military strategy. Despite the initial successes of the UN intervention, the conflict did not come to an end. The entry of Chinese forces into the war in late 1950 further complicated the situation. The Chinese intervention transformed the conflict into a more protracted and brutal struggle, with shifting front lines and high casualties. The UN forces, while initially successful, faced significant challenges in the face of Chinese involvement. The UN's role in the Korean War extended beyond military engagements. The organization played a crucial role in diplomatic efforts to negotiate an armistice and end the conflict. The Armistice Agreement, signed on July 27, 1953, brought an end to active hostilities but did not result in a formal peace treaty. The agreement established the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, a heavily fortified buffer zone between North and South Korea, and set the stage for the continued division of the peninsula. In summary, the UN intervention in the Korean War was a landmark moment in the organization's history and a significant response to North Korea's aggression. The intervention highlighted the UN's role in addressing global conflicts, showcasing the effectiveness of collective military action and international cooperation. Despite the challenges and complexities of the conflict, the UN's involvement played a crucial role in shaping the course of the Korean War and influencing the broader dynamics of the Cold War. Chinese intervention, 1950. The entry of Chinese forces into the Korean War in late 1950 marked a dramatic escalation in the conflict and had profound implications for the course of the war and the broader Cold War landscape. This intervention, driven by China's strategic interests and concerns over the balance of power on the Korean Peninsula, transformed the Korean War into a more protracted and intense struggle. In October 1950, as UN forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, made significant advances into North Korean territory, the situation on the ground began to change dramatically. The successful Incheon landing and subsequent counteroffensive had pushed North Korean troops back across the 38th parallel and deep into their own territory. The UN forces appeared to be on the brink of a decisive victory, with the possibility of a swift end to the conflict. However, this momentum drew the attention of the Chinese government, led by Chairman Mao Zedong. China was deeply concerned about the presence of UN forces near its border and the potential threat posed by a unified Korea under pro-Western influence. The prospect of a hostile force on its doorstep and the potential for the conflict to spread into China's territory motivated Beijing to take action. In response to these concerns, China decided to intervene in the Korean War by sending its troops, known as the People's Volunteer Army, into North Korea. The decision to intervene was based on strategic calculations and the desire to maintain a favorable balance of power in the region. China sought to protect its interests, support its communist ally North Korea, and prevent the spread of Western influence near its borders. The entry of Chinese forces into the war marked a turning point. On October 25, 1950, Chinese troops launched a massive counteroffensive against UN forces. The Chinese intervention caught the UN coalition by surprise and led to a dramatic shift in the conflict. The UN forces, which had been making significant gains, faced a fierce and well-coordinated Chinese offensive that pushed them back southward. The Chinese intervention introduced new challenges for the UN forces. The Chinese troops, familiar with the rugged terrain and equipped for winter warfare, engaged in intense battles with UN forces. The fighting was characterized by high casualties, harsh conditions, and frequent changes in the front lines. The war became a protracted and brutal conflict with no clear path to a quick resolution. One of the most notable battles during the Chinese intervention was the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. This battle, fought from November to December 1950, was a grueling engagement in the harsh winter conditions of North Korea. The Chinese forces encircled UN troops at the Chosin Reservoir, leading to a fierce and costly battle. The battle highlighted the challenges faced by UN forces and the determination of the Chinese military. The Chinese intervention had significant implications for the Korean War and the broader Cold War dynamics. The conflict became a protracted stalemate, with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. The Chinese involvement reinforced the division of Korea and set the stage for a prolonged and bloody struggle. The war continued with shifting front lines and heavy casualties until the Armistice Agreement was signed in 1953. In summary, the Chinese intervention in the Korean War was a pivotal moment that transformed the conflict and had lasting consequences for the region and international relations. China's decision to intervene was driven by strategic concerns and the desire to protect its interests. The intervention led to a prolonged and intense struggle, reshaping the course of the Korean War and influencing the broader dynamics of the Cold War. Battle of Chosin Reservoir, 1950. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, fought from November to December 1950, was one of the most intense and pivotal engagements of the Korean War. This battle, which took place in the harsh winter conditions of North Korea, was a defining moment in the conflict and highlighted the challenges faced by both sides. The battle began as Chinese forces launched a surprise offensive against UN troops, primarily composed of American and South Korean units, who had advanced deep into North Korean territory. The Chinese intervention, which followed the successful Incheon landing and subsequent counteroffensive by UN forces, dramatically altered the dynamics of the war. The Chinese military aimed to encircle and defeat the UN forces, thereby reversing the gains made by the coalition. The Chosin Reservoir area, located in the mountainous and frigid terrain of North Korea, became the focal point of the battle. Harsh winter weather, with temperatures dropping well below freezing, added to the difficulties faced by the soldiers. The terrain was rugged, and the lack of proper infrastructure made logistics and supply lines extremely challenging. The Chinese forces, numbering approximately 120,000 troops, launched their offensive with well-coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Their strategy was to encircle and isolate the UN forces, cutting off their supply lines and forcing them into a desperate situation. The Chinese troops, familiar with the local terrain and equipped for winter warfare, engaged in fierce combat with UN forces. The battle was characterized by brutal and close-quarter fighting. UN troops, led by General Edward Almond and the 1st Marine Division, faced a determined and well-organized enemy. The Chinese forces executed coordinated assaults, leading to intense and chaotic battles in freezing conditions. The fighting was marked by high casualties and significant challenges for both sides. Despite the fierce resistance put up by UN forces, the Chinese offensive succeeded in encircling the troops at the Chosin Reservoir. The UN forces, facing a dire situation, began a fighting withdrawal. The decision to withdraw was not made lightly. It was driven by the need to avoid being completely cut off and annihilated by the encircling Chinese forces. The withdrawal from Chosin Reservoir was a grueling and costly operation. UN troops, struggling against the harsh weather and enemy attacks, managed to execute a fighting retreat over difficult terrain. The withdrawal involved a series of arduous marches and battles as the soldiers fought their way back to safer positions. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir was a significant turning point in the Korean War. While it was a tactical victory for the Chinese forces, it demonstrated the resilience and determination of the UN troops. The battle also highlighted the challenges of conducting military operations in extreme weather conditions and rugged terrain. In summary, the Battle of Chosin Reservoir was a pivotal engagement in the Korean War, characterized by intense combat, harsh winter conditions, and significant challenges for both sides. The battle underscored the complexities of the conflict and had a lasting impact on the course of the war. Despite the difficulties faced by UN forces, their fighting withdrawal from Chosin Reservoir was a testament to their determination and resilience in the face of adversity. Stalemate and Armistice, 1953. The Korean War, which began with a dramatic invasion and saw significant escalations, eventually settled into a protracted stalemate. This period of deadlock, lasting from late 1951 to 1953, was characterized by trench warfare, high casualties, and a grueling struggle for control over the Korean Peninsula. As the war progressed, the initial momentum of both sides gave way to a more static and entrenched conflict. After the dramatic Chinese intervention and the subsequent battles, including the brutal engagement at the Chosin Reservoir, the front lines stabilized. The conflict became a war of attrition, with both North Korean and UN forces digging in along well-fortified positions. The stalemate was marked by trench warfare reminiscent of World War I, with both sides engaged in a grueling and costly struggle for territorial control. The fighting was characterized by heavy casualties, limited territorial gains, and a series of intense battles over key strategic locations. The front lines shifted only marginally, and the conflict became a war of attrition, with both sides enduring heavy losses. The stalemate also had significant humanitarian and economic impacts. The war caused widespread destruction and suffering, particularly in the heavily contested areas along the front lines. The civilian population endured hardships, and the destruction of infrastructure and homes added to the suffering. Amid the stalemate, efforts to negotiate an armistice began in earnest. The armistice negotiations, which took place in Panmunjom, involved complex and protracted discussions. The negotiations were shaped by the broader Cold War context and the desire of both sides to achieve a resolution without further escalation. On July 27, 1953, the Armistice Agreement was signed, bringing an end to active hostilities. The agreement established the Demilitarized Zone, a heavily fortified buffer zone separating North and South Korea. The DMZ became one of the most heavily guarded and militarized areas in the world, reflecting the continued tensions between the two Koreas. The armistice did not result in a formal peace treaty, and the Korean Peninsula remained divided. The agreement effectively froze the conflict and maintained the status quo, with North and South Korea remaining separate entities. The lack of a formal peace treaty meant that the war did not officially end, and the division of Korea persisted. In summary, the stalemate and armistice of 1953 marked a significant phase in the Korean War. The conflict transitioned from dynamic battles to a protracted and grueling stalemate, characterized by trench warfare and high casualties. The Armistice Agreement brought an end to active hostilities, but left the division of Korea unresolved, shaping the future of the peninsula and leaving a lasting legacy of tension and division. The Korean War was a conflict defined by dramatic shifts and pivotal moments. From the division of Korea and the establishment of separate governments to the invasion of South Korea, UN intervention, Chinese involvement, and the eventual stalemate and armistice, the war had profound consequences for the Korean Peninsula and the world. The division of Korea in 1945 set the stage for the ideological and political conflict that followed. The establishment of separate governments in 1948 solidified the division, leading to the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. The UN intervention marked a significant international response, while the Chinese intervention escalated the conflict and transformed it into a more protracted struggle. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir highlighted the challenges faced by both sides, and the stalemate and armistice of 1953 shaped the future of the Korean Peninsula. The conflict's legacy endures, with the division of Korea remaining a defining feature of the region. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Korean War's critical events. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of historical events. Your support helps us bring you more content and keep the discussion going.